I wanted to give you the simplest single hack that I have used inadvertently and seen a tremendous amount of success. That is asking myself the question, what would a person who does this type of thing do in this instance? The one that I'll tell you that I've repeated a lot to myself over the years, probably over the last 5 or 10 years, has been the repeated chorus of, what would a wise man do? I think it's because I did not consider myself to be very wise, and I acted many ways that were unwise earlier on in my life, and I still continue to do so, but I try to do less of it, right? And your identity is much more of a weighing system. It's much more of a voting system where you cast votes in either direction based on your activities of what type of person you want to become. And I think the simplest distillation of that concept is simply asking the question, what would this type of person do? If you can use that as the refrain that you come back to over and over again, the chorus of your day that gets repeated over and over again, I think it's much easier than trying to remember the 50-point checklist of all the activities that you need to do to achieve the goal. I just distilled it down to like, what would a billionaire do? And so when we're confronted with these crossroads, right, you wake up in the morning and you're like, I don't know what I should start on. It's like, what would a billionaire do? And so basically what you can do is have a certain refrain or chorus that you ask yourself, what would this type of person do? And that type of person, when you ask that question, is who you will eventually become as you continue to cast votes that reinforce the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. And those are the things that create long-lasting, deep change. And what's more about this is that these changes, when they become internal, when they become ingrained in our behavior, they become effortless, but it takes time. And so I think that the mental cue that I have given myself inadvertently over the years, I don't have a lot of choruses that I refrain to or that I come back to over and over again. And so I tweeted about one and it got shared a zillion times, but it is, what would someone 10 times smarter than me do in this situation, right? And a different way of saying that is, what would a billionaire do? And word it in whatever way that resonates with you. But I think rather than having that big checklist, you can put just a little post-it on your computer or wherever you work that's a reminder to yourself that this is the type of person I want to become. And in order to become this type of person, I need to do these things because those actions will reinforce the thoughts that I say about myself. We have to give ourselves evidence that we are this type of person in order to become that. But how do you have evidence that you are going to be this person when you have none? Well, it starts with activity. It starts with doing the stuff. And as an added corollary, depending on the goal that you have, it might be, what would a person with a six-pack do? What would a pro champion bodybuilder do? What would an amazing husband do? Or what would the best husband in the world do? And so you can use this framework of asking the question of what your ideal self would do in any given circumstance to apply to a vast number of scenarios. Once we know who we want to become, then that can direct the types of activities that will be in accordance with that. And the identity comes from I don't remember the actual Latin word, but entity is being, right? Like just beingness in and of itself, and identical, which is repeated. So repeated beingness is what your identity is. So what your actions, what you do literally becomes who you are, which means that we can actively change who we are by changing what we do. I think the simple and easiest cue that we can use to change who we are, to change character traits that we find undesirable, is to simply ask ourselves when we're confronted with the decision, what would this type of person do? And then act in accordance to that. And I find it much simpler than having the lists and having the daily routines and the things like that, because if you are this type of person, you will do the types of things that that type of person would do. And that also comes down to the many decisions we haven't accounted for yet. You're going to be confronted with situations that you have not predicted. In fact, the vast majority of us don't predict things well in general. It's because there's far more variables than we can possibly comprehend. The ones that I asked are, what would King Solomon do? Which he was considered, one of the richest and wisest men, which is why it's someone that I revert back to. And the other person that I asked myself was, what would they do in this situation, is Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. When I ask myself that question, and it depends on the scenario, which person I'm going to draw on to answer the question, depending on what suits best, what best suits the objective, et cetera. But I think if you don't know someone, then you can make it the value or the version of yourself with that value, or you can just use an external person that embodies a lot of the character traits that you hope to have, and that can be equally as effective. So it just depends on who you are, but I think any of those are good strategies that you can employ to maximally use this kind of tactic for self-improvement and self-change. Only tactical ask that I have for you is to simply write down, what type of person do I wish to become? And then make that the chorus that you recite to yourself when you're at your crossroads, when you're at your decision points that are going to create who you are on a repeated basis every single day. The vast majority of us know what we need to do. We're just simply not doing it. And I think attacking why we're not doing it is a much more fruitful conversation than trying to discover the secrets of the universe, because the people who achieve the really extraordinary things do the uncommonly obvious thing for an inordinate period of time. And that is what separates them, is that they are doing it because it is who they are, rather than something to achieve an outcome that is finite and external that they don't have control over. Because if you are doing it for who you are, you will continue to play the game indefinitely, which will give you the outsized returns, versus the person who is doing it to make money, which means that when they do make money one month, they pull back on the gas because they accomplish their objective of doing the external thing rather than being who they are, or more of who they want to be.